This will probably be a two-piece phone call indeed, like I did last time, and here we go. Arthur Martin Boyd Jr. was a man in conflict with himself. When I first met him, he was painting flowers. I think it was irises he was painting in acrylic paint on matboard, and doing a great job of it too. As many guys do, he had a nickname. He was called Pearl Harbor. Not sure how the name came about. Mostly we call him Pearl. There's another name David Lawson called him, but it escapes me at the moment. Anyway, he was painting, and while doing so, we talked about the Bible. He was quite knowledgeable, and he obviously believed it. He was a Christian, but he also had demons that he fought. Sometimes the demons had control. At those times, he was as high as a man could be, reading pills. Many times I saw him staggering within minutes of taking a certain type of pain pill. It was so pronounced that I thought he was faking. I was sure he was high, but I always thought he was exaggerating how high he actually was. One day I tried a pill he was taking. Within minutes, my legs were so wobbly that I couldn't walk. Couldn't walk straight. He wasn't faking at all. He fooled me though. Pearl's word was good. If he said he'd do something, it happened. There's a guy that's still here that's from another state. He'd often say this or that was better in Ohio prison. The wine was made better, and the prisons had more power in Ohio prisons than we did here in North Carolina. He and Pearl were good friends. One day they started imitating each other. It was one of the funniest things I've ever seen here. One would squat down and walk, all tough looking, and it was hilarious. Once the guy from Ohio drew a picture. Maybe it was a Jesus picture. He offered to sell it to David Lawson. No sale. The price was reduced again. Again, no sale. The Ohio guy threw the picture in the trash. Pearl saw that, went to the trash, and got the picture. He went to his cell and cut the picture down as it was crinkled on the edges. He went to Lawson and immediately sold it. Lawson liked Pearl, but not the guy from Ohio. If Pearl had any enemies here, I never heard of it. Sometimes he'd be high for days on end. Sometimes he'd stay straight and tell guys they need to stay with God. Those demons he fought, I suspect they lost the fight in the end. After all, God is bigger than any demons and anything else. On October 21st, 1999, the state of North Carolina took the life of Arthur Boyd, but his memory lives on. David Jr. Brown was a guy you couldn't miss. He was a tall, bald, bearded black man. He might have a kufi on his shiny head, as he was a Muslim and was elected by his fellow practitioners to be the leader. I think they call him the imam. When I first got to the road, there were only 2 cell blocks. After being on a bunk bed for a while, when the cell opened on E block, I was all for it. David Brown was on that block. David Brown went by his Islamic name as well as his birth name, Daoud being the former. His name wasn't as important as what he was. He was the guy that had the canteen on the block. When we ran the canteen, it worked like this. I'd make my facility canteen order, and a guy would go get it. If I had small bags of chips that cost me 25 cents, I'd charge 35 cents. If they were my chips, and if they wanted them. And for this fee, I extend credit. Pay me when you get some money. We had cash then, unlike the debit card we use now. There were few hustles a guy could do as well as in a cell block canteen. Another thing we had back in those years was the ability to get food packages from home during the Christmas holiday season. David Brown smoked a pipe. Pipes were sold in the facility canteen, but the pipe tobacco selection left much to be desired. David solved this problem by getting his favorite brand, Captain Black, in for Christmas. He got enough to last until the next Christmas. Michael Pinch, who eventually got off the road and was released a few years ago, liked to pick at David, but in a fun kind of way. As David was Muslim, as I said, Pinch would tell him he knew he'd eat pork chop sandwiches from his food package. He'd go on to say that when David had his door closed, he could smell a sweet smell of swine coming out of his cell. I wouldn't have blamed David had he been true. Pork chops aren't to be sneered at. David ran a business in a sense with the canteen. He liked to be paid in a timely manner, as one would expect. Way back then, I had a problem. I liked to get high. Then I borrowed money from the loan shark. Money I had been getting on a regular basis fell off. I missed a week, thus adding interest to my debt. All the while, I owed David Brown for a canteen bill. When I paid him, I went the next week and wanted a few items. He told me to go somewhere else. That took too long for me to pay. And he was correct in that at that time. However, I have to say that until I got strung out, he always made sure I got what I asked for. Guilt or innocence aside, he was fair to all and had no enemies here, and is missed by many. I hope he found his redemption. When I first met Michael Earl Sexton, we were both on F block. As I said before, I was on a bunk bed in the day room. A couple of months later, I returned to court in order to testify for my uncle, Dan Marr. When I came back to the row, I was on the opposite side of F block. Mike had been in a fight, and when he got off lockup, he was put on a bunk bed, same as me. We played lots of Scrabble. Mike was good at the game. He came up with a saying that became a staple among Scrabble players. If you beat your opponent with a score above 400, you have taken the other guy to the wizard. A sort of Wizard of the Oz reference. You needed a brain, so got taken to see the Wizard of Oz like the Scarecrow. Mike was a dark-skinned man. He kept what I call a low-slow haircut. Just enough hair to style. When he got mad, his eyes, already dark brown, seemed to get darker black. Other guys had noticed the same thing as well. Mike had a habit of bringing his hand to his mouth when he laughed. I assumed it was because he was self-conscious over a small gap between his front teeth. I noticed Dale Rousey do the same thing, and he too had a small gap in his teeth. I used to get high quite a lot in my early years here. I mentioned it any number of times. I'd often get high with some of the guys I was around. Steve McComb was one of the first guys to get me high on a pill I called Benny's. We put some in fountain drinks on ice. Tasted horrible, but got the job done. While hanging with Steve, Mike, and some other guys, I'd overindulge on Benny's. When this would happen, I'd lose touch with reality, which was my goal. Sometimes I'd black out, only to have brief windows of clarity. One particular evening, I shared my Benny's with several guys, one of them being Mike. Usually I felt like I had to have 20 of them. Mike and the other guys only needed a few, so I had at least 13 Benny's. 10 would have done what I needed, which was to take me away from this prison. I took them all. While Mike and the other guy had a good buzz going, I was wired. I found myself thinking about paintbrushes. Not sure why, but I found myself in Mike's room going through his art supplies, among which were paintbrushes. The guys came and asked what I was doing. I mumbled something about paintbrushes. Mike eased me out of the cell. Other guys wouldn't have been so cool about it. I hung out with the guys a while, then I found myself in Mike's cell again. Now I think it's my cell. I kick back on the bed and get comfortable. The guys see me go in Mike's cell and came down to see what I was doing. I'm almost aware of where I am. When Mike asks where I think I am, I have a moment of clarity. I realize I'm in someone else's room when I should be in my own. Mike again helps me up and gets me back to my cell. I was totally safe with these guys. A couple of years later, while playing Scrabble with the guy on the block, Mike was stabbed inside and slashed across the face with a box cutter razor blade. I was in my cell when it started, but the noise brought me to my door. I saw someone throw Mike a jacket to ward off any more razor blade slashes. Then the guards came and grabbed Craig Camacho, the slasher. Mike wore a large scar on his face from then on, from the corner of his eye to the side of his face. I never asked Mike about his alleged crimes. He didn't ask about mine either. In all my dealings with him, Mike was honest and straightforward. Whatever he may have done, that's between him and God. November 9th, 2000, Michael Earl Sexton was put to death by lethal injection. May he rest in peace.